Good morning and welcome to Embracing Change, Talking Through Trauma. And today my guest is June Hall, my friend and trauma expert. And we are here today to have a conversation around trauma. So June, what do you believe is the negative beliefs behind trauma or around trauma?
hmm So I think there are two pieces to it. There are the negative beliefs that the person has, and then the negative beliefs that the people who surround the person who experienced trauma has. And so some of the negative beliefs that a person who's experienced trauma might have are, um, I could have prevented this. It's the coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? If I didn't go there, if I wasn't in this place, if I had prepared better, if I hadn't have been, distracted, there are all sorts of ways that people take on responsibility that they could have prevented the trauma if only they would have. And so oftentimes there's a lot of shame that comes with that and a lot of self-destructive beliefs that then, roll over into other areas of life. And then I think for the larger culture, the negative pieces have to do with how hard it is to hold space for a person who's experienced trauma, right? A lot of times, there's discomfort, so those beliefs also are thought or expressed to that person. There are a lot of places where people are blamed. If you have a person who has been assaulted, well, why were you there? Why were you paying attention? What were you doing? And so that internal dialogue that the person has can be reinforced. And there's a discomfort that comes when you know a person has experienced that. And so sometimes the negative parts that come with it are that the person that should just be able to get over it, right? Like that
Yeah.
happened a month ago. Like, why are you still fussing about that? And so I think that's another piece where there's not space, but there's also an expectation that the person just deals with it and moves on without appreciating just how trauma impacts a person's life for a long, long time.
But it impacts them all the way to the cellular level. I mean, mind, body, spirit. Um, there's no separating it.
Right? Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I think too, I know you've heard me say this before, but you can't separate mental health from physical health. And
Mm-mm.
I think that more and more, especially like as we're moving forward progressively with, there is more awareness around trauma, but I still feel like there still is this. It's almost like there's a division between mental health and um, physical health, and
Mhm.
it just it can't be. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the first things that I talk to people about who've had trauma is first paying attention to their body, in that you need to eat regularly, you need to sleep, move your body if you can. Obviously, some people who have had big traumas, their bodies have been impacted, you know, in that are harmed physically. And so they can't do physical movement right away. And and so I think working with trauma, we start at the body, right? If we don't have some regulation in the body, it's going to be really hard. Now, one of the things that happens often with people who've been traumatized is that their sleep is greatly interrupted. And so it's easy to say, okay, get 8 hours of sleep and eat 3 meals and drink lots of water and go on walks. But when you have a person who's not sleeping, that makes it hard to get out of bed. It makes it hard to pay attention to their body. And so then it's important to develop some sleep hygiene that even if they can't fall asleep right away, that maybe they can be in a relaxed state for a longer period of time. That might help. Um, or find ways to just have the body settle down.
Yeah. What about, in your opinion, and you already know where I'm going with this, but the nervous system, because it becomes so dysregulated, and so many people are, especially on hypervigilance or even in shutdown mode. I mean, I think what you're talking about is when people are, like when their sleep is so disrupted, they get in the ruminating cycle, and it continually moves and goes around for them, and it makes them where they physically can't, because they get themselves stuck in a pattern.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So so on the flip side of that, is there, well, I guess let me paraphrase that first before I go on. Do you feel like there's more? I mean, you've named quite a few things here. Is there anything else that you like in reference to, like, people, like, let's just say, for example, I see a lot in my practice with my clients is the lack of body awareness, and how like even moving their bodies sometimes can be very like, because they're not I know as much as it is, but it's like they're not physically in their bodies. Sometimes it's almost like, and actually asking them to even do a movement that might have a little bit of coordination with it, the motor control, the lack of body awareness can be greatly impacted, along with their breathing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think when you have a person who's traumatized, you have to decide what is the place of focus, right? So you can't have a person who's been traumatized pay attention to all the things, right? They can't, move in this particular way and breathe in this particular way and, you know, all of the things. And so as a teacher, you have to think about what is the most important piece in this moment. And maybe they're going to hold their breath and be ready to pass out, but whatever, right? They're moving their body, and we all breathe eventually. And
Yeah.
so if the task is to have them moving in a particular way, let's focus on the movement and not be so insistent that they have their eyes open, move, breathe, and then that just becomes overwhelming, and they're not going to want to come back, right?
Yeah.
Because they're already feeling disconnected from their body. And so why show up to a class where you have somebody saying, do this, and they're not doing it? Well, do that, and they're not doing it, right? So
Yeah.
we can invite breathing, we can invite keeping the eyes open, we can invite or in a yoga class, closing your eyes, like we can invite that. But I think part of, allowing people the autonomy to make decisions about what feels in their good in their body at that moment.
Yeah. I think you're so spot on when you're talking about giving people choices, and that's so critically important. But one of the things that you talked about was it's hard to hold space for others, and I feel that's one of the pillars of trauma informed movement, is holding space for our clients, and not like, or pausing and letting people just, I'm going to just use the words, just letting someone just be, whether they're on the reformer or whether they're doing mat work. And sometimes I know that can be really hard for people. When I say hard, I think that when I've had teachers approach me about trauma informed movement, that's not in the scope of my practice, and we're not changing things. It's just, it might be a little bit different, but it's not changing the practice of Pilates. It's not changing the practice of yoga. It's just being aware and giving them the space to explore with intuitivity, integrity, curiosity. And for sometimes it might just be their breathing. So, yeah.
Well, and if you think about what is one of the first questions that we ask our Pilates students when we start a class, what's the first question we ask? How's your
Most
body?
people, most people ask, how's your body?
How's your body? So we would, if a person's body, if they're saying, oh, my right knee is just really problematic today, then we're going to think about how to adjust so that we're not overly knee focused and we're going to shift and focus on different things. And I think being trauma informed or trauma informed movement is very similar. We're not asking a whole medical history. If the knee is a problem, we're
No.
not diagnosing it, we're not providing treatment. We're just aware that
Yeah.
that pain is going to impact how a person is experiencing their body that day. And trauma informed movement is applying that same principle to psychological pieces, right? That some
Yes.
days people just aren't going to be coordinated and they're going to be overwhelmed and they're going to be, all of those things. And in the same way, the person who has a knee that's hurt, we're not going to say, okay, we're going to do 10 sets of squats and, good luck on the knee, right? We're
Yeah.
going to say, okay, that doesn't make sense. So we're going to do this over here. And the same thing is true with trauma informed movement, where we're just attuned. And oftentimes people can't articulate that,
Mhm.
I'm feeling this in my body. Sometimes they can, like if, but often not. And so
Mhm.
that just means as careful observers, if we're giving cues and the person isn't following them, can't follow them, then that's a sign to us that we need to shift and think about what seems to be okay in their body that day and
Mhm.
really support that movement.
Yeah. Yes. One of the things that when I like when I have a client where those things are is I actually use external cues with them,
Mhm.
meaning more environmental cues as
Yeah.
opposed, so it's not body focused. And
Yep.
I think that that's really it's been very helpful, and I've seen it in a lot of my clients where once I, just through observation and
Mhm.
just finding out where they are,
Yeah.
and trying not to, like and I don't ask people how their body is. I usually will say, like just a general conversation, but it's not. I try not to focus on their body so much, um, because I want them to walk in and feel comfortable, and I
Mhm.
not approaching that first, especially first thing when they come in. So,
Yeah.
but I've seen a lot of people make lots of strides, and I think that growth we talk about trauma, but there's the other side of trauma is growth and resilience, and there's so much good that comes out of processing the emotional pieces. I mean, I think that in the world of, like, I'm going to just say there is a place for talk therapy, and there's a place for to move your body based movement to help resolve some of the emotional wounds that's behind some of our traumas.
Yeah.
But
And most trauma therapists are going to pay attention to the body, right?
yeah,
Because that's where, I mean, Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps score,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
really, so foundational to the understanding of how trauma impacts us. And I think, when we think about post-traumatic growth, so I think of it, you can think of it as a teeter-totter, or you can think of it as scales, whatever makes most sense to you. When you have trauma, initially, it looks like this. Trauma is like has the most weight, and post-traumatic growth is way up here. And so it's not a linear where, okay, you incorporate trauma and da 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 da, and you get to this point, and then you start having post-traumatic growth. It's more of a gradual piece where eventually trauma won't have as much of an impact and post-traumatic growth will have more impact, but it's not a smooth process either, right? It's kind of like herky-jerky, and you eventually get there. And so there are 5 areas of post-traumatic growth that we consider. And so there's personal strength, there's an appreciation for life, improved relationships, spiritual growth, and new possibilities, right? And so one of the things that happens, a lot of well-meaning people understand what post-traumatic growth will look like, not because they understand the concept of post-traumatic growth, but they have seen people make sense of their trauma and come out the other end. So, for example, the person who gets in a car accident and is wheelchair bound, and then they figure out a clever new something about wheelchairs, or they become advocates for accessibility, or any of those things. So that's a person who makes sense of their experience, and then their new possibility is how they're going to use this experience for the betterment of others, right? But what happens is people will say, in the end, you're going to be able to use this to help other people, la, 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 la. And that may be true, but people need time to get there, right? In the same way, people will say, you're just going to be stronger for this. Well, nobody wants to hear that when they're feeling their most vulnerable and weak, right? And once again, it can take a long time to get there. And so we know the possibilities in the end.
Yeah.
But it's holding space for what happens in between, right?
Yes.
And, many people find a greater connection to their spirituality. But initially, they may think, where were you? How could you not have told me? How could you not have said, this terrible thing's going to happen? So, make sure your child is this, or you don't drive down that road, or whatever. And so maybe people hear stories of, I had this awful incident and then it brought me closer to, enhance my spirituality. I had a deeper relationship with God. Most people, it doesn't, trauma one day, great relationship with God the next day. It's a process. And so, but as we think about post-traumatic growth and people incorporating their traumatic experience, those are the 5 areas where we see, where when people say post-traumatic growth, those are the 5 places where we're thinking about change.
That was a good that was a really very concise. I like what you said about some people take their experiences for the betterment of others. And I think that's really important, because I've seen, like, even in some of the past interviews that I've actually, one I recently did, the guy had a significant traumatic brain injury, and he's gone on to work with other athletes who've had traumatic brain injuries, and like, just to see what he's done with it has really been it's been pretty profound. It's been really profound to see him and the work that he's done, and there was stumbling blocks along the way for him as well, and it was really interesting. But I want to just kind of, like, we talked before, and I think it's really important that people need to be seen, heard, and validated. So important. And I mean, this is one way, like, one of the things that can happen when people choose to take their own experiences and do something different with it. But even if you're just let me rephrase that. Every individual deserves to be seen, heard, and validated. Every single person.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how big or how small their traumas are. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. But so oftentimes people get their voices can get stifled on many different occasions.
Absolutely.
And it even affects, like, their self-esteem or their agency in regards to things like that. So and I've seen other people do the same thing, like with the person, like with the post-traumatic growth, is they'll begin to take baby steps towards the growth, and things will start happening, and you'll see them start to blossom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
I'm
it takes a
sure,
minute, right?
excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go
You're
ahead.
fine. It just takes time, right? And you can't rush it. You know, it's the proverbial example of the chicken pecking its way out of the shelf, you know, the baby chick. We can want to try to rip it off, but that causes damage. And I think when we are not listening and validating, and we're saying, you know, you're going to be so much better in the end, and this will be to your benefit. We're trying to hustle them in the process. But, you know, when people heal, it's not linear, right? It's fits and
Yeah.
starts. You have to do a bit of growth, and then you need some rest, right? You
Yeah.
need some psychological rest, you need some, you know, physical rest, and then you're ready to do it again, and then you need to rest. Um it's not a competition, right? It's a process, and it's individualized, and people get there when they get there, and we can't rush it.
And I coming from working with from the nervous system perspective, it's really interesting because when you're looking at the nervous system and moving through growth is where I want to go.
Mhm.
It's beginning to dig deep into some of the layers of our body, like the emotional layers of our body, and beginning to sense and beginning to have a felt sense around what emotions actually feel like versus numbing and
Right.
avoiding, and even sometimes even turning the storyline, like meaning, for example, um, like giving yourself grace instead of saying, oh, I should have done it that way, but
Mhm.
you pause and you say, you know what, I'll do it a different way next time.
Yep.
Or
Yep.
just turning that storyline around can be really beneficial for people as well in regards to the growth. And I mean, my gosh, when people have gone through trauma, it may have been years and years and years. And to expect, and that's the other piece, is that expectations for people going through, like going through therapy or going through, any kind of intervention that's going to help them with their recovery, so to speak. It's their expectations. You're not going to get there overnight.
Yeah.
And not having a timeline to say, okay, I started it here and I'll be done there. It doesn't, it doesn't happen like that.
It does
And
not.
yeah, and that's where I think that um like having empathy and compassion for other people who are experiencing even the growth period for trauma is
Mhm.
really important. and
Yes.
and seeing how people, like, there might be one day they'll come and they're set to move, and then something happens and it
Mhm.
pulls them back down.
Yeah.
And it's not me, and they may not stay there as long, but yet it's still something that it's a process for them to even, and at the end, and everybody's impacted.
Mhm.
Even if you have family members that have had their own traumas, it
Mhm.
still impacts the family members as well.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that um, we can talk about, but it's so, I think the conversation that we're having, June, is so much needed around, like, the negative aspects of trauma, but there's also healing and growth and resiliency and curiosity. Well, I
Mhm.
wonder how my body would move if.
Mhm.
And it's giving yourself permission to allow, just to sit and breathe, or go outside and put your feet in the grass when the weather permits.
Mhm.
June and I are in Michigan, so it's cold outside today.
Yeah.
So, but I think that conversations like this, I hope we're just at the beginning stages of being able to say we need to bridge mental health and physical health need to come together.
Mhm.
and it needs to be a conversation that's had by both the medical profession with clients and, it because it does, it affects I am not even going to go into, but trauma does impact our health, vitality, in our movement on so many different levels.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's really interesting when we think about the word resilience and how much positive things can come out of that.
Yeah. And, I'm always hesitant to say that um, only post-traumatic growth is going to happen, only resilience is going to happen, because in reality, for some people, it does not come, right? Or it doesn't come, once again, if we get to the scales, and if trauma is very heavy and you've got post-traumatic growth up here, maybe it only gets to here, right? Maybe it never gets to here. And so I think we need to remember that there are some things that are so awful that people experience that and they are damaging in such a profound way that it's almost impossible to find meaning and have this, beautiful, bit of resilience at the end, you know? And so it's kind of like, every Pilates, not every, many Pilates, if you do Pilates once a week, and then after 10 times your body's going to look like this, and after 20 times your body's going to look like this, and la la la. And I'm telling you what, I do a lot of Pilates and I am not long and lithe and lean, right? So I think we have to think of that also in regards to what expectations we're setting for people who've had big trauma, that we can't say, okay, we're going to incorporate your body and get you more integrated, and we're going to do these things, and in the end it's going to be this lovely thing, because that's just a promise that we can't make, because we don't know what that journey is going to be like for that person, and we don't know when a person has been traumatized to the point where they just can't recover from it, right? And maybe they can recover a little bit, right? And there's a difference between having a single episode of trauma versus trauma over and over and over and over as a child, and then having a traumatic experience or multiple traumatic experiences as an adult. So, we just have to, I love the concept of resilience and post-traumatic growth, but I also think we can't promise people that it's going to be this beautiful thing in the end, because we just don't know.
Exactly. I just want to share a couple words of actually two of my clients. When you said after 10 or 20 sessions with Pilates, both of them have said to me, I come to Pilates, and they both have had their own share of traumas.
Mm-hmm.
And they both have said to me, I come to Pilates to keep me out of a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that both of them, when they've said those kind of things to me, it's because some days are better than others for both of them. And I think that when I see growth in them and strength in both of them, I always just like document it with a photo, not to be shared by anybody else, just with them. Say, here you were, and look at you. Look at the growth you've made in X amount of time. But finding ways that are going to make people feel better in their bodies, just and again, it's not always a bed of roses when you're dealing with it. And I think that one of the areas that I probably get the most questions around is how, like, trauma-informed movement in regards to the, and using and utilizing, like, working through the nervous system and understanding that, we can add in a little extra breathing, or we can add in a little variation of a movement that might not be exactly what classical Pilates might have done, but it's finding ways to offer different props, different movement. Maybe one day, and I actually have been known to do this a lot, is they might be coming for a reformer, but yet mat Pilates would feel better on their body versus being in the, because it allows them to have a little bit more integration. So, but yes, I think it's so, and again, it goes back to some of those negative beliefs, but there still is always going to have that, what's the word I'm looking for? It's traumas are always going to be there, but yet I think that with society just coming out of the pandemic, that it's more and more people have mental health issues, and understanding that we are going to have people that are going to come through our doors every single day that have had some kind of trauma in their lives. And there's, I mean, sometimes people don't always acknowledge it, but it's still there. So,
and we can have a person who is in our movement class and then they have a trauma, right?
oh,
Like that's ongoing in our lives, right? There isn't you don't reach a certain age and then get like, well, okay, you have passed the age where you're going to have any more trauma, right? Like there's potential for trauma across the lifespan. And so, that's another place to pay attention to. You may have a person who's, marching along just fine, and then have a traumatic experience and they just lose capacity, right? And we see that a lot in young children or in children, that when they have significant trauma, they just lose developmental capacity and they go backwards. And adults can do the same thing. And so we have to hold space for people maybe, doing things at a particular level and then have a very, traumatic or distressing experience. And then it's like, that's a little bit odd. This person, always comes in and they're able to do this, but not today.
yeah.
And so it's holding space for that.
Yeah. I think it's really important to just, I just want to, because trauma changes our brains. And a lot of times, if they've had a really traumatic experience, it can impact their memory.
Yeah.
And so like, I can't tell you how many times I've had people come where we've done consistent things in movement, and they'll look at me and they'll say, okay, what's next? Like footwork, for example. That's just one example where they can't remember it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really a valid, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's really important to acknowledge, especially when we're seeing, and I can, because my background is also early childhood as well, is understanding that, going through the pandemic, like especially with students that have been in high school, and some of them have had really significant delays or regressions that have put them to a point where it might be, even though they're 18, they might be functioning way below their 18-year mark. So
yeah. Well, and I think about myself, I have both a receptive and expressive language disorder, right? And when I have periods of high distress, those things are amplified, right? So I'm just thinking, a couple of weeks ago, I had a Pilates lesson, and I don't think Rachel gave me one instruction that I followed accurately, right? Like, but I was distressed, and not traumatized, but I was having a day of distress. And so my receptive language disorder just, it shows up a whole lot more, where I can't follow instructions. And I do best when I can look at a person and lip read at the same time that they're talking to me, because that allows my brain to bring in all of the information better. Well, when I'm on the tower and, she's giving instructions, I can't lip read. And so, she's given me, and she's like, no, no, how about maybe we should? And I'm like, Rachel, it's me. My brain's not working today, right?
And if I'm not mistaken, you're also doing this via Zoom, which is another
Yes.
that's another layer of can be miscommunication.
Yeah. And she's really very skilled at giving step-by-step directions and telling how to do things. Like she's very skilled at that, but it just couldn't come in my brain in a
Yeah,
way that made sense because my brain just doesn't work like that. And so it's it everybody has their own little quirk, right? That just
sure.
happens to be mine.
Yeah.
And so when a person comes in and they're not able to do the thing, it's just the brain's not able to take in maybe more than it's got going on, right?
Mhm.
Maybe they're lying there thinking about this very distressing thing and they
Yes.
can't hear, they can't attend to what you're saying. And so it may just take a few extra prompts to get them moving in the right direction.
So I just want to make a point because you just said a few things there that were really important, especially the hearing. So when we're in distress, it definitely impacts our hearing, it impacts our vision,
Yep.
and obviously it impacts the brain, but it also impacts our voice.
Hmm.
And I I think that because our vocal cords, because of the vagus nerve, and it actually becomes constricted.
Hmm.
So it's really, that was a really good example, June, a really good example.
Hmm.
Your body had lots going on that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, for me, like theoretically, I know how to do this stuff, right? And I can't even like, and the footwork was one of them, right?
Oh,
Where I was doing footwork on the tower and she was like, you know, rotate this and point. And I was like, I just really can't. Like, I cannot get it to do the thing I wanted to do.
well, and I think it's really, I mean, because you're an very experienced Pilates practitioner,
Yeah.
as well as you've gone through, Pilates training. So you're not just your average Pilates client. So
Hmm.
you have a lot of awareness. But sometimes it's interesting to think about how, again, the motor control, the coordination, and those kind of things, because it's the longer I study the brain and trauma, the more I realize how it's intersected. And that's why I guess I'm actually, I would have to say to you, I'm very nerdy when it comes to neuroscience with the brain.
Yep.
So yeah, it is, but it's really important because it gives clarity around a lot of things when you know and you have an understanding and awareness of how trauma impacts, and then not just from watching YouTube videos and your own experiences. Like I it how does it impact lots of people, not just on a personal level, but how does it impact? And I think I've been I shouldn't say reading. I have been just paying attention, and I think to be trauma informed is something that's almost going to be um, imperative for people
Hmm.
coming into the future. But it's not just doing and becoming trauma informed and getting a certificate. It's ongoing because science is changing around it. The theoretic, I mean, all kinds of stuff. They're having trauma informed leadership and trauma informed. I mean, there's just everything is trauma informed, and
Yeah.
and I think it's trauma informed businesses,
Yeah.
and I think it's just going to be progressive. Even in the next 5 years, I think it's going to explode to have people become trauma informed, and how how it impacts people who are, neurodivergent and all kinds of things. So, but yeah. So June, do you, because we got to come to a close here shortly, is there
Mhm.
anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, so I will add the one thing, and I know you have this. I recently got a move mate, which is
Oh,
it's a wobble board, but it articulates. And
yes.
I mean, you might want to put a link to their website in your, show notes. And it rocks, but also your feet can move. And I find that the most soothing, calming movement on the planet. Like I will stand on my move mate to the point where when I go to bed at night, my calves hurt because I will spend an hour, and then I'll do an appointment and then I'll stand on it for another hour. And it's just this very like gentle, moving, rocking. It is like, I think that has been one of the best nervous system soothers that I've found in a long time. I love the MoveMate people. I think everybody
Um,
should have one and keep them in business because they're
I
just
would,
amazing.
I would say to you, um, I've never made it a secret, but I started with MoveMate because I've had a lot of trauma to my feet.
Mhm.
And I'm always looking to help improve because one of the things that I see with trauma is the imbalances. Like when I say imbalance, I'm talking about balance in their bodies. And so I'm always giving clients different ways to find balance, lots of different ways.
Mhm.
And so the movement to me is, I mean, it's been a life changer for me, like you, but it's also been working with my clients. I use it at least once a day with my clients when I see clients in person.
Yeah.
Because the proprioception in our feet is just so like it starts with our feet. And
Yeah.
but I had no idea you liked it that much, but you're right, it is absolutely a nervous system soother. It's I another Pilates instructor, Jenna Safino, was actually the one that
Mhm. Yep.
I actually found it from. So I will give her credit as well. So
Yeah.
Jenna was the one as well. But to see how it has soothed so many other people's nervous system. Like I actually start with it sometimes and
Yeah.
just doing breath work and moving their feet on the
Mhm.
movement. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
so
And it's beautiful
thank
to
you
stand
so.
on it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, to move on. I actually have it. I don't have it up here. It's actually downstairs in my studio, but I actually will put it. Do you got it? Oh my gosh. Here
Oh,
it
yeah.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. So it has this lovely moving, articulating function to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
I do have to say one of my clients is a very um he knows a lot about woodworking, and he actually looked at it, and his comments to me has been it's very art. I mean, it's the craftsmanship behind it is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I have.
but when you look at it from a nervous system standpoint, oh yeah. Have you tried putting your hands on it, June,
I haven't.
and doing down dog?
No, that's a great
Oh.
idea.
The other one I like to use it with is just even cat cow and have them put their
Uh-huh.
hands on and move like how cats like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah it's worked. So anyways, thank you so much, and will you stay on just a second when we're
Yeah, I'd
finished?
be
And
happy to.
so thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.